We'll give folks a couple minutes to get logged in here, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, and welcome to our live Q&A on the 2022 Social Security Trustees Report. My name is Lauren LaFerla, and I'm the Director of Communications here at Covism. And I'm joined today by Joe Alsasser. Joe is a certified financial planner and the founder and president of Covism. Under his leadership, Covism has developed a variety of groundbreaking financial planning tools, including Social Security Timing, which was the first patented Social Security optimizer, Tax Clarity, Smart Risk, and Income Insight. Joe co-authored Social Security Essentials, Smart Ways to Boost Your Retirement Income, and is a regular contributor for USA Today, Investment News, Retirement Daily, CNBC, and Think Advisor. Joe maintains a financial planning practice in Omaha, Nebraska. Our format today is a little bit different. Over the next half hour, I'm going to ask Joe a series of questions about the latest trustees report and the future of the program. We're addressing questions throughout the presentation, so feel free to send your questions using the Q&A feature, and I will add them to my list. We're going to get through as many questions as we can in the time allotted. Just a reminder, we will be recording today's presentation, and you will receive a link to the recording in your inbox later today. We will go ahead and get started. So Joe, can you give us a quick overview of the 2022 Social Security Trustees Report?
Sure. I think the headline that everybody probably saw is, hey, things aren't as bad as they were last year. And that's a good thing. Ultimately, we've had to have this discussion with our clients for the last 10, 15 years, however long you've been involved in doing retirement income planning. And if you've had any kind of focus on Social Security, you know that the solvency of the system has always been a central question. When we rewind 10 years or 10 years plus, and we say, okay, actually more than half of our clients would have been dead by the time the Social Security Trust Fund ran out of money. That was a really simple way of thinking about it is, for most of our clients, and particularly for those older clients who were retiring 10 years ago, the solvency issues were much less of a concern than they are for people who are on the cusp of retirement today. When we think about a number that is 2034 or 2035, that is well within the life expectancy of any of our clients who are making retirement decisions today. And so I think, yes, there's a headline number that says we were really worried last year. We're a little less worried this year. But the thing we have to take away is that the system is still slated to run out of money in 12 or 13 years. That's well within the life expectancy of the vast majority of our clients, particularly those who are making retirement decisions today. And so as part of any communication that you're having with clients about Social Security and about how to take benefits, how they fit in the context of an overall financial plan, that's got to be the headline, is there will be changes to the Social Security system. We don't know exactly what, and we don't know exactly when, but the key number is that right now, trust funds are slated to run out of money in 2034. And I'm going to say 2034 because in the absence of any congressional action, OASI, Old Age and Survivors Insurance, and OASDI, which is the combined disability and survivors insurance together, they're actually separate trust funds. The DI Trust Fund and the Retirement Trust Fund are separate. So without congressional action, only the OASI Trust Fund is available to pay retirement benefits. Now, last year's trustees report said that would run out of money in 2033. This year, that advanced 1 year to 2034, primarily because of some adjustments in terms of the tax revenues that came in last year. And I know we'll talk about that a little bit later, but 2034 is the key date for for just retirement benefits, and 77% of benefits are slated to be payable after the fact. And actually, it's between about 72 and 77%, depending on the year, because tax revenues and beneficiary numbers range year by year. But the year after depletion, it's 77%. Now, OASDI, it's commonly referred to, this is the headline we typically see. So that went to 2035. Last year's report said 2034. And at that point, it's projected that 80% of benefits would be payable after depletion. Now, the most common reason why OASDI is reported together is because in the past, the disability trust fund was the one that had problems, right? There were more people claiming disability benefits and actually being awarded disability benefits than there were trust funds available to pay them. And so Congress repeatedly has authorized infusions from OASI to shore up DI. Now we're looking at potentially the other way. DI benefits could potentially be used to shore up OASDI, I guess OASI, in the future. So those are some of the key dates. And I'm going to have a few slides throughout here, but most of the time I think it's just going to be a bit of a Q&A, so I'll stop sharing.
So Lonnie asks, when you say run out of money, do you actually mean short of money? Do you want to explain kind of what you mean by?
So in the past, roughly for the last 40 years, since roughly 1983, we started rebuilding Social Security trust funds. And Social Security trust funds are the excess dollars from current workers that are not being used to fund benefits for current beneficiaries. And so what happened between that period of all the changes in 1983, the system was broke in 1983, a whole bunch of changes had to happen to get it on solid footing. And then as the baby boom generation was working, they were paying in more benefits than were being paid out at the time. And as a result, we built up this trust fund. Now, that trust fund is now being depleted, and it has been since 2010. And so when I say Social Security runs out of money, what I mean is that the trust fund goes to zero. All of those excess funds that were accumulated during the baby boom working years are now being spent on baby boomer retirement benefits.
Great. That makes a lot of sense. I want to hop back to, you talked a lot about the headlines after this report came out and how, they were saying that, Social Security is in better shape than we thought. However, the trust fund is slated to run out fairly soon, as you mentioned, 2035. Do you think it's potentially misleading the public into thinking that Social Security may be more secure than it really is?
As long as there's context, and that context, I think about my parents, right? My parents are kind of a litmus test for me. And of course, with the financial planning practice here in Omaha, our clients are a litmus test for me. And I don't think anyone has put the idea that Social Security is not on sound financial footing completely out of their mind. In fact, it still is the central question for people who are making the decision today. So, I don't think it's misleading, but I do think it's important for advisors to make sure we center on this idea that change will happen. Hopefully it's not forced change. Hopefully it's intentional change.
George asked if you could put up the first slide for reference. If that's doable, we'll pop that up for you, George. And in the meantime, that was a pretty good segue into talking about kind of some options for shoring up the system, since it's still a concern. For instance, Doug here asks, one proposal I've heard is giving wealthier Americans the option to opt out in exchange for a tax break. Sounds like a good idea. Do you have any details on that?
Actually, I think that's extremely unlikely. Because wealthier individuals actually experience a negative rate of return by paying into Social Security. So for example, and we have another webinar that is, I believe, Lauren, I think it's archived on our website, that we did just a couple of months ago, where we went through a bunch of the solvency provisions. So every year, Social Security updates a report, I think it's about 40 pages, and it's small print, but it's all the different proposals that are out there to shore up the Social Security system. So rather than allowing wealthier individuals to opt out, the real options that are on the table that increase program solvency actually add another bend point for high wage earners and have them paying tax on income that is above the current taxable Social Security or the current wage cap. So, 147, 148,000 roughly, I think it is today, would have them paying, maybe there's a donut hole and then they pay on dollars over 400,000, or maybe there's no donut hole and you're just paying, FICA tax on all of your income. Those are the more likely options on the table. I think it's highly unlikely that the wealthier individuals are allowed to opt out.
So I guess going off of that, there's all these proposals that have been discussed. Do you think the new report is likely to impact legislative change? I feel like this is something we've been talking about for a long time, and we haven't seen a whole lot of action on the legislative side of things.
Yeah, if historical context is any guide, no, I don't think it's going to. I do think it's going to prompt discussion. Right? If you pay attention to any of the bill trackers that are out there, you see Social Security bills proposed every year. They get great press for Congress people. They're able to talk about the efforts that they're putting in, but nobody really expects them to go anywhere. If you look at 1983, we were literally just a few months away from a benefit cut to statutory benefits rather than scheduled benefits or promised benefits. And I have no doubt that we might get a little bit of small reform along the way, like the Bipartisan Budget Act back in 2015. But I don't think we're going to see a massive overhaul of the Social Security system until we're down to the wire. For advisors, what does that really mean? It means that there's going to be, and there's going to continue to be, a lot of uncertainty. Each year that passes, each trustee's report that comes out, moves the bar just a tiny little bit. But each time it is a valuable talking point for those people who have just aged into having to think about the decision.
Absolutely. Daniel asks, is the estimate of when Social Security will be out of money, including repayment of any loans made to the general fund?
So when you say loans made to the general fund, what I'm assuming you mean is that the way the trust fund actually operates is trust fund issues special government bonds that are senior to others. And those bonds are purchased by, the Fed, that allows them to, basically pay interest to the Social Security Trust Fund. I'm assuming you mean that that Social Security doesn't default on those bonds. Maybe I'm not clear on the question. Actually, I'm kind of working through the question there.
It just specifies that the Social Security fund was used to lend money to the U.S. General Fund is all he mentions. But maybe Daniel, if you want to provide a few additional details, maybe I can
come back to that one.
That sounds great. Frederick, asks, on the solvency issue, is there any chance of allowing the trust funds to be invested beyond government bonds for a greater return?
So actually, that is a provision that was addressed in that solvency report that I mentioned. We also addressed it in that last webinar. The likelihood there is really no, because now we're it's highly unlikely. And really, the biggest reason is because we're in a spot where we're spending down trust funds really quickly, right? And as a result, we've only got 12, 13 years of those trust funds being available. And if you think that congressional action is going to happen in that short term, I just really don't think that's going to happen. And if we wait until after trust funds are depleted, then there's really no impact on solvency, right? Because we wouldn't, just think in our own financial planning practices for a client who's going to spend money within the next, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Most of those funds, we're probably not investing those in anything that's going to generate substantial growth above a government bond.
That's a good analogy. Is it less likely for a future increase to the full retirement age as life expectancy hasn't been increasing, or not substantially? So I guess this is a question about moving the full retirement age.
Yeah, actually, I do think moving full retirement age you're right. Life expectancy has not been increasing as quickly as it had in the past. At the same time, it is still misaligned with Social Security benefit amounts. And so there is probably a pretty good likely that some movement there is part of an overall solution.
Do you feel that what is happening now is similar to a repeat of what happened in 1983 to 1985, and the same resolution will be applied? Payroll taxes will be increased, the earnings cap will be lifted. That question's from Aaron.
So I think the big difference now is the deficit is bigger. And 1983, there were some general revenue infusions while tax rates caught up. Basically we had some scheduled FICA tax increases that were accelerated, and there were some tax credits that offset those. So it was effectively general revenue kind of bridging the gap while that adjustment could happen. I do expect we'll probably see some FICA tax changes. I do think it's a realistic possibility that there is an impact on high wage earners that is disproportionate, and whether that's a change to the earnings cap combined with a change to benefit calculation mechanisms, maybe an extra bend point. I do think those are all on the table, because just moving full retirement age and just moving taxes, those two changes together, I don't expect that there's going to be a public that's willing to accept those two changes alone.
Daniel asked, the general fund would have to default on money owed to the Social Security fund. With the national debt and annual deficits, can the U.S. government afford to repay any bonds issued by the Social Security fund as investments of excess Social Security funds in the past?
So now, in theory, those bonds that Social Security holds, they're senior to all other government bonds. So if we're in that kind of a scenario where the general fund has defaulted, we're in a nasty overall environment. We're talking about massive financial collapse kind of situation.
David is wondering if you can explain how bend points work.
I think I'm going to have to come back to that, because we've got quite a bit of just general content. At least I know we want to talk about some of the assumptions that have underlied the changes from last year to this year.
Absolutely. Last year, you talked a lot about the assumptions of the 2021 report, including the low inflation rate that was predicted and the higher fertility rate. Did the assumptions of this report kind of surprise you? Do you have similar thoughts about these assumptions?
So I'm gonna come to the one that I mentioned earlier, and that's disability. But the whole COLA, the inflation story, is really interesting. If you dig into these Social Security reports, what you'll notice is that the low cost scenario, so Social Security always publishes at least three scenarios. Scenario 1, scenario 2, and scenario 3. Scenario 1 is the low cost scenario. Scenario 2 are the intermediate assumptions. And scenario 3 is kind of a high cost situation. Scenario 2 is the one we always talk about, right? That's whenever we talk about what the long-term projected average is like for COLAs at 2.4%. That's all from the intermediate assumptions. What I find interesting is that the low cost assumption is the one that actually has the higher inflation rate. And that's always been true. And the reason is because historically, when we have high inflation, we also have other things happening, right? We have wage growth that's happening. As long as wages are growing, as long as overall the economy is growing, you've got taxable payroll increasing, and that immediately increases revenue, where the cost of living adjustment doesn't happen until the next year and is paid out over time. And so when you think about it, yeah, last year, Social Security projected 3.06, and then cost of living came out at 5.9. We were really worried that something else would happen, right? And that was that payroll that the average wage would go down, but what ended up happening was something different. We actually got wage growth anyway. And so that put us on a little bit better footing than the expectation. Well, this year's report assumes 4.54% and then 2.33% for 2023 for COLAs, and then returning to the long-term projection of 2.4%. Now, as of right now, if you're reading any of the headlines, it's actually possible we might see a 10% COLA this year, which by itself, yes, that immediately creates a higher outlay next year. But it's just fine as long as we continue to have productivity gains, as long as we don't have kind of a stagflation scenario. Where we do run into trouble is if we get the stagflation scenario where there's a decoupling between prices and wages. And if wages don't go up or we have really high unemployment, then we've got much lower taxes into the system. That's the situation that really results in higher program costs and substantial decreases in revenue. So that's where that misalignment is the thing that's a little scary. I think I've got a slide for this one, actually. Yeah, so some of the historical, this was kind of interesting. So I mentioned 2021 was projected at 3.06, the actual was 5.9. 2022 projected 4.54 and then 2.33, then back to 2.4. So this was my little nerd project for the last few weeks. I went back and read Social Security Trustees reports from 1975 to 1981, because that was really the period of time when we were dealing with the great inflation. And it's really interesting to look at those because the first year they're always pretty close. Yellow is the second year out from the projection and orange is the third year. And it seems like in each of these situations, until we were firmly in the middle of this nasty inflationary cycle, it was always, it's going to get better next year. You kind of look, okay, the first year, this is the 75 report. This is for 1975. So it should be extremely close. 76, you see, that first year is in white. Now, this is the first year. Green is the first year after, and yellow is the year after that. Orange is 3 years out. And so what you'll notice is not real good at identifying these inflationary spikes and not real good. Inflation is notoriously hard to predict, right? And so you can see how far off we are when it gets to 2 and 3 years out from an event. So this idea of 4.54 for next year and then 2.33 for the year after, primarily due to oil prices is really the expectation there. Oil prices coming back down, but at the same time, there were supply shocks and demand shocks then, right? There's nothing that says those kinds of things can't happen again. So I think that's the real concern is, we're not going to have any real idea until we're in it. And when we're in it, we're not going to have any real idea until it's over. And that's kind of, you look at 1981. 1981 was really interesting because in 1981, Social Security trustees didn't just do one set of intermediate assumptions. They did an A and a B. And the A was what happens if we just, if we implement some economic growth oriented policies. This is Reagan years, right? Implement some economic growth oriented policies and try to really work to bring inflation down, productivity and employment up. And so what you ended up seeing was A says, yeah, if we do some of those things, it's really going to help. B is if we don't do those things, really not going to help, and we're going to linger in a pretty bad way. So inflation over those years was, average inflation was 8.7 with 14.3 there in 1980. And there were no prior reports that projected that spike, nor the 11.2 the year after. So it's one of those things where we won't know till we're in it, and we won't know we're out of it till we're out of it. So I think that's really an important thing for us to be aware of as we're talking about inflation and Social Security.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. But how can advisors address some of the client concerns, when they when the answer is, oh, we won't really know until we're in there, but clients are coming to you really, really worried, what can advisors do to kind of address those concerns about inflation and its impact on their retirement strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think every advisor right now is dealing with that, particularly because this year's been nasty in that we got stocks and bonds moving together, right? Under most circumstances, you're looking for your stocks to kind of hedge inflation, at least over the long term. And you're looking for your bonds to be your bellwether when markets pull back. And this year we're not getting the ballast. And so it's a critical discussion. The way we think about it, and let's see here, I threw in a whole bunch of slides, like I said. So the way we think about it is you plan for kind of your average scenario. And really, you think about the Social Security Trustees report, they're doing the same thing, right? You plan for an intermediate scenario, and then you stress test for a bad scenario. And you say, what do we look like in a bad scenario? So, that's for those of you who use Income Insight, this is the most recent feature, just came out sometime at the end of last quarter. And that was the inflation stress test. And it said, okay, well, what if we do get this nasty kind of historical sort of inflation? We average 7.6% per year. That's the geometric average over the first 10 years of a plan, requiring the same increases to your after-tax income to maintain your standard of living. You check a box like this and it redoes your projection. So you're saying, are you okay in normal circumstances? And then are you okay under stress? That's really how we suggest handling any of these hypotheticals, is to say, is your plan okay under the expected path? And then what if we throw a stressor at it? Is it still okay? And that's what we do with inflation.
So our software Social Security timing has also been updated, and it allows advisors to demonstrate the impact of funding cuts. Can you talk a little bit about how advisors can use the software to highlight the findings of the report and kind of set themselves apart from the competition?
Sure. No matter what, I do think we need to be addressing benefit cuts, because in the absence of congressional action, right now we saw on those early slides, we are looking at benefit cuts. Now, do I think that an across the board benefit cut is going to materialize? I really don't, right? I think there will be some changes, and there'll probably be differential changes. They'll happen, more significant changes to higher wage earners and less significant changes to lower wage earners. But at the same time, what is the baseline, right? What should we plan for? Look at the debt ceiling, right? I mean, every doggone year we hear about the debt ceiling. We hear about the fight in Congress, and then ultimately the obligations are met. Now, I don't know that that'll continue indefinitely, but I can absolutely see a scenario where we don't have a Congress that can agree. And so we get a temporary fix, and then we get another temporary fix, and we might have that draw out for a few years. Hopefully that's not the political reality, 11, 12, 13 years down the road. But it is a possible scenario. And the other possible scenario is we can't even get to a fix. And so we just need to say, are you okay, Mr. and Mrs. Client, if you do see the statutory benefits being paid? And the statutory benefits are only the funds that Social Security brings in dedicated payroll tax can be used to pay benefits. And so between payroll tax and tax on benefits, only those funds can be used to pay benefits. That represents that 23% benefit cut occurring in 2034. So you have the ability with one click of a button to show what's the impact on the strategies, and then also to show the client, okay, how does that move your break-even age, right? So for this client, we've got a split strategy where one claims early. We've got a both delay strategy out here in blue, and we've got a claim early strategy. For this client, you notice break-even ages move just by a couple of years if they see a benefit cut. Now, I mentioned early on, the life expectancies that Social Security is based on, they are out of date. And so for most of our clients, even in the presence of just an across the board benefit cut, they're still better off following a Social Security strategy.
Is there anything else that you want advisors to know about the Social Security Trustees report, or how to add it to their retirement planning
Now,
going?
there's a really big talking point here that I want to make sure we address, and that's roughly 60% of the improvement. I'm going to just do this real quick because I think it's something to really watch out for. So when we look at what are the changes to the report that resulted in improvements, some of the changes were economic data and assumptions, and I think we've talked about a lot of those. You know, there was a much higher revenue last year from taxable Social Security benefits, much higher revenue than projected. And so that was one of the drivers of this economic data and assumptions. The other really significant one is this disability data and assumptions. And there are a couple of slides that I grabbed for this because Social Security publishes, like I said, a low cost, an intermediate, and a high cost. So low cost is 1, intermediate is 2, high cost is 3. So you look at the disability, this gray line, light gray line, that's the disability trust fund. This was the one we saw on that initial slide. And so right now, disability is supposed to run a surplus. The big reason is because there was an adjustment in the assumption for what percentage of people will claim, actually how many people will claim disability benefits. And they took it from 5.8 to, 5 per thousand to 4.8 per thousand. And that's a really big change. That change alone, in theory, that change alone actually represents 60% of the movement in the overall trust fund for OASDI, in the combined trust fund. Now, it's true, disability incidence rates have been going down for about the last decade. But the real question is that likely to continue? And under what circumstances is it likely to continue? You know, we just got out of, and I can't even say we got out of, you know, we've still got some major changes to our daily lives due to COVID, but you can qualify for disability for depression and anxiety. And if you spend any time looking at what are the requirements to qualify, and you look at what's happening with, you know, middle income people who are potentially being estranged from parts of the workforce, I'll put it that way. There is a real potential that we see an increase in claims for disability and anxiety. I don't know what level those will be approved, but it's something to really be watching for, because you look at all these and it's typically kind of a 2-year timeline, 2-year lag when you start to see these kinds of claims. And whenever you have economic troubles that have accompanied disability claims spike. And so you look back to the Great Recession, you had baby boomers still in the workforce, but you saw some massive layoffs and you saw an absolutely massive spike in disability applications. And so do we see that kind of a scenario going forward? I don't know with any level of certainty, but that's a real scenario. And if 60% of the improvement for that 1 year came from that change to assumptions, that's a big deal. That's a big deal, and it's an assumption that might not hold true in a post-pandemic world. Of course, at the beginning of every one of these trustees reports for the last couple of years, we've seen, hey, we don't know what the pandemic impacts are going to be. This is a pandemic impact that I would watch out for.
Absolutely. That's such a good point. And I feel like we've seen so much about mental health issues increasing. So I feel like that is a very valid point. That is, in fact, all the time we have for today. Just a reminder, a recording of the presentation and a link to a survey will be sent to your inbox later today. Please take a moment to complete the survey. We really appreciate your feedback. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.